Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Lori Johnson.
And I'm Ephraim Graham. We begin today with a deadly day in Jerusalem as Palestinian terrorists invade a synagogue. Two attackers targeted defenseless worshipers, hacking them with knives and axes and shooting them with handguns. At least 4 were killed in one of the worst terror attacks in years. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell has the story.
This amateur video shows the final shootout with police outside the synagogue. The attack took place here in Har Nof, a religious neighborhood in Jerusalem. The terrorists burst into the synagogue behind me, then shot and stabbed the people as they gathered for early morning prayers.
2 terrorist Palestinians from East Jerusalem entered inside the synagogue. They were armed with knives, axes, and a pistol. The synagogue was packed at the time with people praying in peace and quiet. And as a result of this terrorist attack, where shots were fired and innocent people were sadly attacked, 4 Israelis were pronounced dead at the scene.
We go inside, we see people just laying down with this Jewish tefillin and talit covered with blood. Part of them, I'm not sure if they were shot or just cut up or, stabbed. You run from person to person, check who's alive, who's not alive. Every face you see, you hope it's not your brother or your brother-in-law, father-in-law, parents, because, we live in this neighborhood.
Residents of the quiet area, home to many English speakers, were in shock.
They came into a quiet neighborhood. It's not in East Jerusalem or occupied territories, any of that lexicon. They came in here to people who were praying and killed them while they're praying, in cold blood. People who were going to come home to take the kids to school. The kids are sitting at home or actually walking around over here wondering where their fathers are.
We would expect the world to wake up and realize what we're dealing with. Everybody expects us to do peace. To make peace, we want peace. We pray for peace 3 times a day. But at the same time, we need partners.
Hamas immediately praised the attack, calling the terrorists heroes. And while the Palestinian Authority condemned the attack, Israel's government blamed the PA for its incitement.
Ultimately, today what is needed is for the international community to unequivocally condemn the Palestinian Authority for competing with the Islamist radicals in propagating a culture of violence and hatred. That must cease immediately, and the international community must hold the PA accountable.
4 members of the Har Nof community went to pray early in the morning at the Sons of the Torah synagogue. They never came home. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Har Nof, Jerusalem.
New numbers show terrorism is on the rise. Last year, there were nearly 10,000 terror attacks. That's 44% more than the year before. Researchers at the London-based Institute for Economics and Peace say those attacks resulted in nearly 18,000 deaths. The Islamic State, Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda, and the Taliban were responsible for 66% of the fatalities. The study also found Iraq was the country most impacted by terrorism. We'll have much more about the rising threat to the West later in the show.
Back here in the U.S., President Obama is expected to sign an executive order on immigration as early as this week. Republican lawmakers call the move unconstitutional. As Caitlin Burke reports, they say they'll do what it takes to keep him from acting unilaterally.
The newly elected Congress is still months from being sworn in, but Republicans are vowing to do whatever they can to block President Obama from reforming the immigration system without them.
Talk about arrogance. Where was this president used to say elections have consequences? We're talking about how can the Congress force the president to follow the law?
Republicans say the real fight here isn't over immigration, but the route the president's taking to get what he wants.
There's an opportunity for us to get some things done here, and instead the president is going down this unilateral path, and it's going to make it very hard for us to get anything done on immigration or any other issue for that matter.
President Obama's immigration overhaul is expected to exempt as many as 5 million undocumented immigrants from deportation and also grant them temporary work permits. Democrats say they stand behind the president, arguing that Republicans have failed to take action on immigration. But Republicans point out that the president could have acted in the past as well.
He purposely said, I'm going to wait till after the election because I know it's not going to be popular to grant amnesty to millions of folks here that are here illegally.
The president ought to let the Republican Congress, the Republican House and the Republican Senate come together with legislation that they put on his desk which relates to immigration. And he can veto it or not. but let the Congress and let this election have its say.
Republicans say the president's plan is only a temporary solution, and it won't bring about the reform that the American people want. It's still unclear how lawmakers will oppose Obama, but some have hinted at blocking his spending.
There's no reason that we can't fund all of our immigration agencies and law enforcement agencies, yet not let the president use taxpayer dollars to give Social Security numbers and work permits and photo IDs to illegal immigrants.
Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
The public favors Republicans in Congress taking charge of policy in Washington rather than President Obama. A new Gallup poll shows 56% of Americans would rather have Republicans have more influence on the direction of the country. Only 36% prefer the president. Republicans have a 42% favorable rating, and Democrats have a 36% favorable rating.
The Keystone XL pipeline is finally making its way through Congress, the Senate voting after 6 years of debate. But the White House still suggests the president will veto the bill, despite strong bipartisan support. John Waggy has more on the project that could mean tens of thousands of new jobs.
No KXL! No KXL! No KXL! Anti-Keystone protesters chanted outside the home of embattled Louisiana Senator Mary Landrieu in Washington, filling her yard with an inflatable pipeline.
If she wants this pipeline so badly, it can go through her front yard and not any one of ours.
But Landrieu's pushing hard for it because it may be her only hope for winning a runoff election next month. Her opponent, Bill Kassig, sponsored a House bill to build Keystone, which could mean 30,000 Louisiana jobs. The Obama administration and Senate Democrats have blocked a vote on the $5.4 billion pipeline from Canada for years. Landrieu's Senate Republican colleagues say it's high time that stopped.
The Canadians are going to produce the oil. The only question is whether or not America is going to benefit from it, and we're going to get the jobs that come with it, and whether we're going to replace the oil, the same type of oil that's coming in from Venezuela, which is what the State Department said this project would do.
The Heritage Foundation's Nick Loris says the president's people have studied Keystone long enough.
President Obama himself said that he would make his determination based on whether it would contribute significantly to climate change, which has been the big issue around this pipeline. And his own State Department even concluded that this pipeline won't contribute significantly to climate change because the Canadian tar sands oil is coming out of the ground whether this pipeline is built or not. So why not bring that oil down to our Gulf Coast refineries and create the jobs here?
Protesters say that given oil spills in the Gulf, Landrieu should know better than to back the project, and they're worried about environmental damage in states like Nebraska, which would house the pipeline.
And unfortunately, cleaning up the Gulf was a piece of cake compared to what it's going to be to clean up a tar sand spill in the Ogallala Aquifer.
But with people hurting for jobs, the votes may be there even to override a potential veto by President Obama.
The public wants it. It has bipartisan support. It was much needed economic growth and much needed oil coming to the U.S. So, I think it's all economic benefits, for building this pipeline. So I can't imagine what the good reason for vetoing Keystone XL would be.
John Waggy, CBN News.
Pope Francis is meeting this week with 14 other religious leaders who all believe in traditional marriage. The three-day conference includes evangelicals like popular American pastor Rick Warren, author of the wildly successful Purpose-Driven Life, and Russell Moore of the Southern Baptist Convention. The Pope addressed a recent controversy in the Catholic Church. He said marriage between a man and a woman is a fundamental pillar of society, and children have the right to grow up with a mother and father. Weeks ago, some Catholic bishops proposed a radical acceptance of gay marriage, which outraged the conservative base and was later shot down. The Pope will be in Philadelphia next year at a rally for families.
The weather is ugly across much of the country today. Forecasters calling the Great Lakes a snow magnet. Parts of New York and Ontario are bracing for more than 2 feet through tomorrow afternoon. The National Weather Service says the Lake Michigan shoreline could get up to 16 inches, with up to 18 inches along Lake Superior. Nearly half of the country is already covered in snow. Residents are shoveling out across the frozen Midwest, while road crews are working around the clock to clear the roads.
We'll work double our hours today until the snow quits, until we get all the roads cleared.
I hate the snow. If it came the last day of winter, it would be too early for me.
At least 11 people have been killed in car accidents from Minnesota to Texas, and the South saw an outbreak of severe weather, including an EF1 tornado with winds of 105 miles an hour near Macon, Georgia.
Could the world be running out of chocolate? Well, some of the world's largest chocolate makers say that's the path we're headed down. They cite a perfect storm, less cocoa being produced and more people devouring it. In 2013, consumers ate about 70,000 metric tons more cocoa than was produced. The Ivory Coast and Ghana produce more than 70% of the world's cocoa beans. Dry weather and a fungal disease called frosty pod are limiting growth. Plus, dark chocolate is also rising in popularity, and it takes much more cocoa to make that.
Coming up, a frightening look at terrorists recruiting fellow Muslims, not from the Middle East, but from Europe.
We're learning new details about the death of the American aid worker in Syria. A Paris prosecutor says a French convert to radical Islam appears in the video that shows the beheading of Peter Kassig. The man is identified as 22-year-old Maxime Osha. French authorities say he's been on the radar since he left for Syria in 2013 under the cover of humanitarian action. Meanwhile, the main jihadist who taunts the West on the video is believed to be British because of his accent. And one British father also says he thinks his son is among the unmasked men in the video. But French citizens make up the largest contingent of European jihadi fighters who have joined extremists in Syria and Iraq.
European officials are on high alert because so many of their young Muslims have joined the jihad in Syria and Iraq. They're worried these Islamic radicals may bring terrorism home with them. Dale Hurd has this chilling story from Paris.
This is a message to the brothers who stayed behind.
These are British jihadists in Syria, trying to recruit more Muslim young men to come and join them. They've taken to social media to share an Islamic message with their friends back home. Even if you've led a sinful life, the Quran teaches that martyrdom is a ticket to heaven.
Dear brothers, especially brothers, and also sisters, we're in the land of jihad at the moment with a Glock 19. Yeah? Most of you Playboy guys ain't seen this yet. What we've come to do here is what's prescribed to us as Muslim men. But I also invite you all over to the land of jihad. Allahu Akbar!
Grisly Instagram photos and videos sent out to friends back home include bags and even truckloads of severed heads. Someday these jihadists will go home. Some already have. Mehdi Namouche, the French gunman who killed 4 people at the Jewish Museum in Brussels in May, was arrested carrying a homemade flag of ISIS, the terrorists who have set up an Islamic State in Iraq. Mehdi Namouche went to fight in Syria in 2012. The French government knows it has a big problem on its hands. Hundreds of Muslim radicals who went to Syria to fight in the civil war and are bringing jihad back to Europe. More than 700 Frenchmen and as many as 3,000 Europeans are believed to have fought or are now fighting in Syria and Iraq. They are young men who did not, in their eyes, go bad. They believe they found religion. And when they're not killing people, they're handing out Qurans and helping establish a worldwide Islamic State. The mother of one of the jihadists talked to Britain's Sky News.
Absolutely shocked to see how his character has changed. He's a lovely boy that any mother could ever have and want. He's honest, always caring for his family, always want to be there for them. And he's just one of those best boys any mother could ever want.
This Dutch jihadist in Syria, talking to a reporter via Skype, thought it was amusing that the British government, by helping Islamic rebels in Syria, was helping jihad.
It's funny. I mean, the British government itself is funding and training, be it in Jordan or wherever here in Syria, the Free Syrian Army. So basically, the British government is helping, and I'm helping in my way.
Helping to bring an Islamic caliphate.
So far, 8 European nations have agreed to exchange information about the European jihadists in the hope of tracking them and possibly arresting them when they return. Strong enforcement is needed because there are many more Mehdi Nemmouches who want to attack in Europe.
It's almost inevitable that having joined an organization like ISIS, for example, that is even too extreme for Al-Qaeda, that these individuals will at some stage be sent back to Europe, to Britain, and expected to conduct terrorist attacks here.
French officials just uncovered a plot by Muslim radicals to blow up the Eiffel Tower and take down airliners. The former head of France's National Jewish Association says, unfortunately, it's a mathematical certainty that more European Jews will die at the hands of Muslim radicals.
It is mathematical because to cross the border is very simple. To buy a Kalashnikov, it's nothing.
But the motivation is so strong.
And the motivation is extremely strong.
Europe's failed experiment in multiculturalism could suddenly become very dangerous for everyone when the war in the Middle East is over and Europe's jihadists all go home. Dale Hurd, CBN News, Paris.
Up next, they're called millennials, and they'll make up most of the workforce by 2020. Find out where they're going in the business world and why after this.
Well, you've probably heard the saying, the world is your oyster, and that is certainly true for the millennial generation who grew up in the age of the internet.
And they're using the web to look for jobs, not just in the U.S., but around the world.
Companies are spending millions to find out what makes millennials tick. What do they like? What drives them? You name it. Employers need that information to recruit and hire this generation that will make up a majority of the workforce by 2020. Some of the things on their mind? Fulfillment, flexibility, fast progression. And they're always on the lookout for something new.
The opportunity to work abroad in places like London is now seen by many companies as a great way to attract and retain this new generation of worker.
A new PwC study shows that 2/3 of the world's millennials feel the need to gain international experience to further their careers.
Exposure and opportunities to try different things and learn different things. So whether that's specific assignments, whether that's locally, in their office or their region or the country that they're in, or offering global assignments. They're definitely, I end up coaching more and more people on trying to figure out how do I get that exposure and experience and build my credibility so that when there is an opportunity that comes up that I'm going to be considered for it.
Executive coach and consultant Nina Newberry says the millennials' desire for mobility comes in part from the easy access they've had to the rest of the world.
The more exposure you get to something different, and if you've traveled a lot as well, it's amazing, how much you pick up and learn about other cultures. We're working in a much more global environment.
In 2010, Lauren and Tyler Knight decided to take advantage of their global connections and moved to London to work and continue their education.
It's been a whole process where we've more or less been settling in over the last 4 or 5 years here in the UK, where it started off with just studying and then just studying and having a job and then having multiple jobs. And so the whole process has really been us setting up our lives here in the UK.
Lauren and Tyler are the directors of the Harding University London campus, where they work with some of the youngest members of the millennial generation whose interest in living abroad is just now being sparked by their time here.
This is definitely a big networking process, and we're getting to learn about different people and meet different people and just make those connections that I feel like will definitely come in handy later in life, like Lauren and Tyler, and just knowing people that live here and that can help us if we choose to come back.
I've always sort of planned on just traveling around the world and living in as many places as possible. And I want to be a writer one day, so I figured, hey, that's a very mobile job. I can live wherever for that.
It definitely teaches you how to interact with other people from different parts of the world and to be able to work with them and understand their culture a little bit better.
Lauren studied in both London and Italy during her undergrad at Harding. When she and Tyler decided to move overseas, she reached out to the school.
Just told him, hey, I've got a lot of contacts. If you'd want to meet anybody, I'd be happy to
introduce you to some of the buyers for the students to meet while they're studying for the business program. And as luck would have it, the current director had resigned and they were looking for someone to fill in the interim. So I started on-site facilitator or something. And as we did a few successful semesters, it turned into full-time director of the program.
Along with his work at the London campus, Tyler has started his own company called Extra Mile.
We are more or less credit card points for healthy activities.
Tyler makes it work because of his ability to stay connected through technology.
My development teams in India, my business pursuits are mostly in the U.S., but I almost never leave London. So technology we live in a time where really this is the first wave of being able to maintain a lifestyle in one place where you're actually not necessarily conducting business.
The Knights say they realize that their career paths look much different than those of their parents.
Our parents, or people their age maybe, got on a path, really enjoyed it, and tried to move up within that company. Whereas we're kind of like, yeah, we take lesser pay as long as we get more time to do what we want.
I think you see a lot of us jumping from job to job to job because we think at some point we're going to figure it out. Right. And then at some point, we realize we can't figure it out, but we've gained all these skills along the way, and it's really enabled us to do a lot of different things.
Differences between millennials and older generations don't necessarily mean success or failure, only the start of something new. Caitlin Burke, CBN News, London.
Finally today, CBN's Orphans Promise is helping children in Africa receive an education.
In Senegal, many children are illiterate because their parents cannot afford to send them to school. Orphans Promise established a program that provides funding for school fees and supplies. So far, 200 children have received assistance. These children are also members of Superbook clubs where they learn about Jesus each week. There are more than 18,000 children enrolled in more than 100 Superbook clubs, and more than 1,000 have accepted Christ. You can find out more about what CBN is doing around the world by logging on to cbn.com/international.
Fantastic.
Beautiful to see.
Well, that's it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the stories you care most about on cbnnews.com.
And be sure to take the time to tell us what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do it on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Make it a terrific Tuesday, everybody.